Welcome to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast for farmers and ag professionals by the Iowa Farm Bureau, bringing you the news, experts, and educational insights that matter most. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our July 12th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Zach Bader, and in this episode, we're digging into the crucial issue of cattle market transparency. We'll also touch base with the leader of an exciting new project that couples rural economic development with the latest advancements in renewable energy technology and value-added ag. But we start with the issue of cattle market transparency. And of course, that's an issue that's really frustrated producers here in Iowa and around the country for far too long. So where do things stand with investigations into cattle markets, and what role is Farm Bureau playing? Spokesman editor Dirk Steimel met up with Iowa Farm Bureau President Craig Hill to discuss those questions and others.
Good morning, Craig. We want to visit today about the growing concerns about today's cattle market. Why do you think cattle producers are so concerned about the transparency and the fairness of the markets?
Well, good morning, Dirk. And well, to begin, the live cattle market has been in decline for the last 6 years. And there's been a growing concern financially for many of our farmers. But in addition to that, 80% of our cattle slaughtered today are being conducted by just 4 entities. And that can lead to market manipulation. It has raised considerable speculation and suspicion of collusion and anti-competitive practices. These practices are unproven at this time. However, I believe it needs investigation. In August of 2019, the Tyson plant in Holcomb, Kansas caught fire, and while other plants expanded their hours and additional slaughter capacity increased, more cattle were slaughtered subsequent to the fire, but we still saw a precipitous decline in livestock producers' prices, as well as consumers' prices grew exponentially. In fact, we had the highest or record levels of profits to packers as long as data has been collected and price reporting has been done. COVID came along in 2020. Producers received very low prices, consumer paid higher prices. The same result, it's left many of us scratching our heads.
Obviously, Craig, this is caught on in Washington. The U.S. Senate Ag Committee recently held a hearing to examine the cattle market, and the Judiciary Committee is set to hold a hearing yet this month. Why are these hearings important?
Well, it's so important at this time of uncertainty to kind of air the facts, gain an understanding and a perspective from market participants, from stakeholders and experts, economists and others, so we can have a broader conversation, one that's open and honest, and hopefully solve this problem and any other remedies that can be brought along or solutions in the process.
Craig, can you tell me about the steps that the Iowa Farm Bureau and American Farm Bureau are taking to address cattle farmers' concerns?
Well, first of all, livestock producers deserve to have fair access to competitive markets. And some of our cattle producers get but only one bid. And you can't have a fair competitive market with just one bid. It takes a second bidder. But we've called repeatedly for investigations from the CFTC, or the Commodities Future Trading Corporation, as well as USDA and the Department of Justice, DOJ. We've been seeking reauthorization of the Federal Mandatory Livestock Reporting Act to improve the visibility to what takes place in the industry. We're attempting to shine a bright light on these challenges and support efforts to add additional processing capacity, not only nationally, but right here at home in our state of Iowa. And we're taking a very clear-eyed view of what adjustments may be needed.
The Department of Justice has yet to issue an update on its investigation into livestock markets and potential manipulation, despite launching the investigation way back in the fall of 2019 when the Holcomb, Kansas fire happened. Why is it important for the department to issue a report or an update on this investigation?
Well, we've had serious allegations of price manipulation, collusion, and unfair practices and so on. So we need to determine if these claims are valid. And if not, what steps can a cattle producer do to improve the market power that they have in the food supply chain? We need to move forward. It's just that plain and simple.
Craig, you mentioned the USDA's livestock mandatory reporting system. Why is it important for that to be updated and for the creation of a contract library? Do you think those steps would be helpful?
Well, once again, a fair and healthy competitive market is essential for our producers. It needs to be robust, it needs to be efficient, and it needs to be completely transparent. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. Transparency is so important, so everyone can see what are the factors in price discovery and what are the factors in the prices that are paid. It's about visibility, and it's about a contract library, if you will. It allows for that. So we can look at the contracts, we can look at the agreements that are being placed between producers and our packers and processors. So everyone understands what we need to do to have more market power in the marketplace and how we can elevate our prices as well.
Are there contract libraries in other species, other types of packing?
Certainly. We have a pork contract library that's already being implemented now, and so we want to follow suit with a beef contract library as well.
Greg, a lot of farmers are looking into selling directly to consumers or working through local or regional processors instead of the national packers because of these pricing issues along with the disruptions we had during COVID. Do you think this shift could help bring better markets for farmers and help spur the needed changes we're looking for in beef pricing and transparency? Also, are there ways that the federal or state government can help spur the development of these more local or regional processors?
Absolutely, and these bottlenecks exist. They're true today. We have a lack of processor capacity, and the expansion of that processor capacity will benefit both the producers and benefit the consumer, everyone involved. To speak here in Iowa, the local relationships and the benefits that we have locally by processing at home, that's important. A consumer knows where their cattle are coming from. They know the farmer that raised them. They oftentimes can select upon what may be breeding characteristics or what nutritional characteristics might be involved in that. So there's a niche opportunity as well as just building an understanding and for folks to be able to relate to where their meat comes from. And so this is important. And I'm proud that here in Iowa we have a new bill just passed in the legislature that's going to enable local processors. We have several bills in Congress today that we're supporting, and USDA has some grant programs that also will assist. So we've been working for these for many years. They're on the table now and ready to be executed, and we're looking forward to that.
Iowa livestock producers, cattle, hog, poultry, pride themselves in taking care of their animals and providing good care in all types of conditions. Do you think that bringing farmers and consumers closer together will help our markets?
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned it, the pride that farmers have in the production of their calves and their cattle and everything they do and the technology and the sophistication that's gone into producing those animals is something that we should be all proud of, and to share the experience of production with the consumer so they understand, and also for that consumer to know where their food comes from is just a really important concept.
It's time for answers, it's time for transparency, and as you heard from President Hill there, Farm Bureau will continue working to make that happen. All right, from livestock markets, let's switch gears here and talk about a new crop marketing opportunity that's scheduled to be available for central and eastern Iowa farmers later next year. I'm talking about the Shell Rock Soy Processing plant that's been spearheaded by the Mid-Iowa Cooperative and their CEO, Mike Kinley. Of course, the groundbreaking for that plant happened late last year, with plans to start receiving soybeans from farmers mid-year in 2022. I had a chance to catch up with Mike recently to talk about the plant and the recent agreement that they reached that's going to allow them to deliver all of the soybean oil that they produce to Phillips 66. So let's jump into that conversation right now. All right, I'm joined by Mike Kinley here. Mike, tell me, so this soybean processing plant that the Mid-Iowa Co-op and others are building near Shell Rock recently signed an agreement to deliver all of the soy oil that it produces to Phillips 66, which can use it to make renewable diesel. Why is this agreement such a big deal for Iowa farmers?
Well, Zach, it's good to be with you today, and we're very blessed to have an arrangement like that with Phillips 66. What it really represents is the strength of the demand for soy oil as it relates to the fuel side of the global economy and what's happening with renewable fuels. As you well know, we saw a pretty big boom on the corn side of things over the past 15 years because of the ethanol build out, and I'm not predicting that that's going to be the case here. However, the demand for soy oil is super strong, and this company, Phillips 66, is a real leader in that transition that these petroleum companies are trying to make, a transition from petroleum-based fuels to renewable feedstocks for fuel production. And they've worked real hard to create technologies that can take soy oil and other fats and oils and greases and convert those into diesel fuel. That technology is superior to other technologies out there. They're able to make a diesel fuel out of soy oil that's identical to petroleum-based diesel, so it's a superior product, but it's renewable. And from that standpoint, that represents a long-term sustainable demand curve for soy oil. So that agreement, the first of its kind, is really indicative of the strength and the demand in the future for this soy oil as a feedstock for renewable diesel and frankly, renewable jet fuel and renewable gasoline production in the future. There's going to be other agreements, I'm sure, announced by other petroleum companies reaching back into the supply chain to secure the feedstocks for their renewable diesel production. But this was the first of its kind. But all of it adds up to a really bright picture for soybean production for the producers out there, in that we're now going to take another leg up in the demand for our products. So it's a really bright picture.
So what we're talking about here is renewable diesel, right? What's referred to as renewable diesel. Is that right?
Right. That's correct.
And so can you give us kind of a quick explanation of what is the difference between what is called renewable diesel versus what is the more traditional biodiesel? And do you see supplying soy oil for refiners to make renewable diesel as a promising growth market for Iowa soybean farmers?
Absolutely. Well, renewable diesel is a new product in the marketplace. It's a product that's in high demand, especially on the West Coast, in those states that have a low carbon fuel standard in their state. And that's really driving the demand for the product. However, the product is unique in that the petroleum refiners worked very hard the last 10 years, and about 5 years ago kind of broke through to create a technology, a catalyst, if you will, that helps them transition their petroleum refineries into renewable feedstock refineries. And so the catalyst allows them to make this diesel product, which again is molecularly identical to petroleum-based diesel. And so that product does not have a number of the drawbacks that you'll see in the wintertime with cold temperature reactions and things like that. And that catalyst that they utilize within their refinery is of ample supply, and so they will be able to scale up the production of this product significantly. And again, that just puts more demand into the system for fats, oils, and greases, including soy oil.
You kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but why would a big national, global, brand, Phillips 66, big refiner, why would they contract for all their soy oil to come from this new processing plant? And what kind of impact are you expecting annually as a result of that?
Well, it's all really originates, Zach, from the demand created by the consumer and by government regulation. And so as there's more and more focus on burning cleaner fuels and fuels that have a lower carbon intensity or lower impact on the carbon life cycle, that is the demand driver, if you will, for products like this. Now, folks like Phillips 66 have a very big appetite for producing renewable diesel because of, again, the attributes of the product and the fact that there's incentives in the marketplace for them to produce this product instead of producing a petroleum-based diesel. And they have also got a global, as you mentioned, a global brand, Phillips 66 branded fuels, and they react to what the consumer demands. And so we're going to see a pretty big evolution that may feel for a short while like a revolution coming through the country as it relates to greener branded products for the consumer to purchase. That's really what's driving this.
So I assume along with that we're going to see, you'd anticipate seeing more plants like the Shell Rock plant being constructed in Iowa and other big soybean growing states?
Before I address that question, I also would want to just mention that the Phillips agreement, as I said, indicates the demand for the product, but it also indicates that these large companies have a strong desire to secure and lock up the feedstock. It shows us that the soy oil business is changing. In the past, the majority of the soy oil was going to the food industry, and it'll continue to be the majority of the demand from food industry, but most of that was managed by brokers matching up buyers and sellers. What this Phillips agreement really indicates is that these companies see enough pressure on the feedstock supply that they really don't want to utilize a middleman, and they want to lock this up directly. Now, having said that, the dynamic that's going to drive whether we have more soy crush plants is there's really a triangle, if you will, or a three-legged table that you have to address. One, you have to address the fact that about 50% of the soybeans produced in the United States up till now have been exported. And when they're exported to another country, they're simply crushed in that country. The only thing you can do with soybeans is to crush them and process them into oil and meal and hulls. And so it's going to get crushed somewhere anyway. What's happening here is that the U.S. is going to have a higher demand for these fuels, and soy oil is going to be demanded in a greater fashion here in the United States. And so that will drive the prospects of another facility or 2 or 10 getting built in the U.S. Second leg of the stool certainly is putting the processing plant in the right place. As you can imagine, you've got to have ample soybean supply, and you have to have soybeans priced reasonably enough to make a margin in producing soybean oil. That's a pretty big deal to make sure you have the right market space for locating the plant. And of course, all the logistics that go with that, railroad access and all those things are very critical for that plant to be competitive. And third leg of the stool is interesting. As you look at global protein demand, it's actually growing at a 3 to 6% rate, and that's what it's predicted to grow at for some time. And that's really exciting for the soybean complex. But if the demand for soy oil is going to drive more crushing here in the U.S., it's going to put more pressure on the value of our domestic soybean meal and the pricing in that marketplace. So you've got to be very wise about not only where you put the plant and the logistical connections to get your products to market, not only in the U.S. but globally, but you also have to be aware of where the animal numbers are for domestic and global soy meal consumption, and make sure that you've got those relationships and logistics all figured out.
So we're really talking about a global equation here. Can you break it down for us on a local level? Because obviously this is going to have a local impact on jobs, a local impact on demand for the product that farmers are providing. In your instance there, talk a little bit about the local demand, the local economic impact.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing I would like folks to take from this conversation today is There's nothing more supportive to the longer term prospects of a commodity complex like soybean than a really strong nearby market. And what I mean by that is, when you take a look at case studies on value-added agriculture, ethanol was a good example in the beginning. I think you're going to see some of the same attributes of this situation. When you build a value-added capability locally, it gives that farm community and everybody that's involved in that farm community a real leg up in the longer term pricing dynamics and the support of that valuation of that commodity, much more than if they were relying on access to the river or other global demands. And so putting a soy processing plant in the Shell Rock, Iowa area as an example creates a ripple effect of sustainability of pricing over a long period of time. You'll have your periods where you'll see some fluctuations in the nearby values, but the longer term trajectory of the value of soybean production, being a soybean farmer, is going to become more and more attractive. And I firmly believe that what we're seeing here with the entire life cycle analysis of production agriculture, food production, fuel production, and the consumer demand that's coming as we see these different generations, these younger generations come along, when you start to read the data and study it, it shows us that they many times will make the choice of a lower impact on the environment as part of the value proposition versus the cost of the commodity or the cost of the product they're buying. So there's a lot of long-term positives to the growth of the soybean complex. Having one locally certainly gives that local community of producers a leg up and a much more sustainable pricing picture over the long haul.
So I'm sure the folks there locally are really excited about those prospects as well. So can you for those folks, kind of give us an update on the progress of the construction of the plant? When do you expect to open it and begin buying soybeans?
Well, there's some really good news here, Zach. We, of course, everybody knows last fall when we broke ground, we had one of the most open harvests we've had in a long time. And we, of course, there at Shell Rock on site, were able to do a lot of work and go well into December and pulled ahead quite a bit on the schedule. And then, of course, again this spring, having been on the drier side, allowing the construction folks to get in there and pour concrete and such, we've also gained ground here this spring. So as it relates to the schedule of, getting this plant across the goal line by December of 2022, we're actually well ahead of schedule. Now things can happen along the way on these large projects, and so you always want to have a buffer in there. But as it looks today, we'd be able to receive soybeans into the grain elevator on site by July of 2022, and we'll be crushing beans in December of 2022 and be involved in the global market space on behalf of Iowa farmers starting in 2023. So pretty exciting stuff.
It does. It sounds like it's an exciting time to be involved in agriculture in general, but specifically up in that corner of the state as well. I'm sure there's a lot of excitement and anticipation about this plant, and we appreciate you, Mike, coming on the podcast to share a little bit about it.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you guys, and thanks to everybody for their thoughts and prayers on this project. It's going in the right direction. So thanks again.
Thanks, Mike. The line that stuck out the most for me there is when Mike talked about biofuels, and of course, in this case, he's talking about renewable diesel. He's talking about them helping satisfy consumer demands for greener products, something that he described as an evolution that may feel like a bit of a revolution that's coming. And I think that really speaks to the power of a project like this, as well as agriculture in general. What we do right here in Iowa fulfills a local need, but it also serves our national and global needs. And that's only increasing as technology opens up new opportunities in renewable energy and in other areas. Okay, that brings me to the end of this podcast episode. I'd like to thank our guests, President Hill and Mike Kinley, for joining us. And before you go, I'd like to remind you of a couple opportunities that are coming up. The first one is on July 14th. It's our virtual roundtable titled Carbon Credit Markets, What Farmers Need to Know. And if you have questions about the sustainability programs that private sector businesses are offering farmers, you do not want to miss that roundtable. And on July 28th, we have a webinar on a free and confidential wellness coaching and counseling service that's brand new in 2021, and it's available exclusively to Iowa's farm families. You can get registered for both of those events by heading out to iowafarmbureau.com. That's all for this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll join us for our next one on July 26th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything that we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.